Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends Podcast. With me today is Matthew Clarke. Matthew Clarke is a two-time Olympian. He went to the Tokyo and Paris Olympics, and he studied podiatry at La Trobe University. We're going to get into his career. We're going to get into sports podiatry. So, Matthew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Tyson.
Okay, so I've got to go back a bit. Obviously, you did athletics when you were younger.
Yep.
And I'm assuming because of athletics, were you exposed to podiatry? Is that how you got you into it?
Yeah, so I think initially, I guess I finished school, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought healthcare or something in that kind of medical field excited me just in terms of the workplace. And so I didn't really know much about like podiatry in particular. I was thinking maybe like physio. I think every sporty kid's exposed to physios.
Yeah.
I looked into medicine, but I think the commitment to it was just a lot with sport and everything else I wanted to do. I didn't really want to sacrifice that much of my life. And so I started off doing a science degree at Monash, and it was interesting. I have lots of cool facts in my head now about rocks and dinosaurs and biology, but
that never goes astray. That you will never not use that when you're talking with patients.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I found that stuff interesting because I live in South Australia now. There's a relatively high number of geoscientists that live here. And because there's a massive mining industry in South Australia. And so every once in a while, I can hold my own, talking to a couple of them because I've done a little bit of study in that. But I found when I was doing that course, science was just so broad. Like you go, like for example, two people can do a science degree, and they can do completely different subjects all the way through and never cross over at all and come out with the same degree just with different majors and minors. And that didn't really excite me too much just from a learning point of view. So I ended up having a semester off and was doing a lot of my running. And I was actually chatting to Stuart McSwain, who was the previous Australian record holder in the 1500 meters and Olympic finalist. And he was studying podiatry at the time. And I was chatting to him about what it was like at uni. He was at La Trobe. And he was saying like it was the complete opposite of what I was describing. He said all the classes are hyper specialized. You are with a relatively small group, everyone that's doing it, and where the biggest contrast is for me that really excited me is you're learning skills that you're going to take directly into your professional life. And so that really like clear pathway of learning towards what you're going to be working in. I found that really a lot more motivating, easier to, I think, enjoy the learning process from that. And once I started, it just flowed and it complemented my sport really well, I think. Dan Banana, who is one of my year level coordinators, he's obviously like on the seat of the Sports and Exercise Podiatry Australia board. And like he has a massive interest in sport. So he was really good at supporting me and helping me through, well, I could still do my sport at the same time. So there was just so many ways that it worked well in. It was just like a match made in heaven.
So you didn't finish the first degree, you just switched partway through?
Yeah, okay. I only did science for not even a year. Yeah.
Okay. So once you were doing podiatry, knowing that you were at quite a high level athlete, did the university or did the podiatry departments give you a little bit of flexibility and leeway with training, or if you had to compete at an event?
They did, not in the first year. I actually wasn't that good in my first year of running. So I only started running seriously when I was about 19, nearly 20.
Okay.
And so, like, for example, like when I was at Monash, I was like basically just weekend warrior kind of thing.
Well, actually, I read that on your Wikipedia page. It said that you ran until you were in year 8. You stopped.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until you started doing podiatry at La Trobe that all of a sudden you got back into the running and it just sort of came together.
The goals just like accidentally kept getting bigger and bigger. So I got into it because the first year at La Trobe in podiatry, full time, I had 7 contact hours. So I was like, I have all this free time and I need to fill it because I was working in a restaurant part-time, but they could only give me so many hours. So I needed something to do with most of my days. And so I just started running. I had a few friends, to be fair, that were doing it, and they were in pretty good squads. And I ran an okay level in school up until year 8. So I made a nationals. I came 12th at nationals. Probably my best run I ever did when I was young was under 14s. I ran 4:22 and came second to Luke Matthews at APS Champs. And he went on to get a Com Games medal in the 800. So I've had glimpses of being all right. I don't think anything that really indicated the level that I got to, but it was definitely enough to, I think.
So I like your level of all right. Is this far above the average person?
Yeah, well, like, to be fair though, like I
Yeah.
think that there's like I coach a bunch of juniors now, and there's a plethora of them that all run heaps faster than what I was running at their age. And I think just statistically though, they're probably not all going to go on to make two Olympics. So there wasn't really anything that I was doing at a young age that I think really excited people that said, oh, this guy's going to make two Olympics in the future. I think it was might get a state medal. I never actually got a Victorian state medal. So I didn't even get a state medal until I moved to South Australia, and we got a bit of a smaller population. So it was a bit easier over here. But I did nothing as a junior that really indicated. In fact, the only national medal I ever got as a junior was actually in surf life saving.
Completely different.
Yeah, it was a 2K beach run. Yeah.
Oh,
I was like on softs and barefoot. So it's a pretty different style of running.
So was there a certain point then? So you're doing podiatry, you started. Would it be awesome if you had said, well, actually, I made this magical pair of orthotics. I put them in the shoes. They just, all of a sudden, they just made me run so much faster. But was there a certain time when you were training with that group that all of a sudden you went, holy crap, I'm actually better than I thought I was going to be, or I've sort of impressed myself?
Yeah, I think that's something that I think just from a like personal motivation point of view, like kept me in the sport, is I think I never really had super high expectations. When I got into running, my goal was to break 4 minutes for the 1500. That was the mark that the top guys at the APS level were running.
Yeah.
And so I thought, I'd be cool to, in my life, do a sub 4 1500. And then I ended up ticking that off in my first year, getting back into running. And so I was like, okay, I'm not ready to stop running yet. And so I just added like a slightly bigger goal every time. And so then it was, make a Victorian state champs 1500 meter final, go to nationals, make a national final, try and make an Australian team. So for me, that was World Uni Games. Yeah. And it wasn't until I accidentally ran a really good 10K road. I ran 29:07 and was running next to Jack Rayner at the time in this race. Ended up beating Liam Adams and Collis Birmingham, who had both run for Australia at the time. And I remember chatting to my coach saying that was a bit unexpected. Like, I've knocked nearly 90 seconds off my PB in that. Do you think there's a chance, I beat some good runners in this. I know some of them are in the back end of their career, but do you think there's a chance that I can maybe make an Australian team? And I was getting coached by Justin Rinaldi at this point, and he said, yeah, maybe. He goes, you're not going to do it at the 1500 though. He goes, you made the national final last year and you come 9th. So they only select 3. So you're a long way off getting top 3 in Australia for the 1500. And he was going through the field lists on the Australian team. He said, it looks like there's a gap at the moment in the 10K or in the steeplechase. And I thought, I played a lot of sports and I was pretty reasonable at most sports I played in school. So I think coordination's not too much of an issue. Let's try the steeplechase. And I remember I had a good relationship with the hurdles coach, Steve Fabris, that was doing some middle distance running with us at the time. And he was kind enough to give up just about every single Monday through winter that year, just get my technique as flawless as we could get. And then when I started training for it, putting hurdles into my actual training program, I just found I just took to it like a fish in water kind of thing. And kind of the rest was history from there. So I got pretty lucky in that.
I've watched the steeplechase. I love watching that race because it's like it's when people watch motor racing, but you want to see a car crash. And it's the steeplechase I find very similar, where you don't want to see anyone get hurt, but when you see them towards the end, when there's a pile of them all coming towards that jump and the water is there, and it just takes one to go ass up. And as soon as one goes ass up, you see everybody else changing their stride to get out of the way. It's actually one of the more exciting events, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty uncontrolled chaos. And I think that's what makes it pretty awesome from a viewing point of view. Is especially at the last lap, if it's semi-tactical and there's a pack full of really fresh athletes, they are throwing the kitchen sink at themselves, going into a 91 centimeter roadblock that doesn't move at all, basically, if you knock it. They're not thinking at all about being I'm just going to skip out on half a second and jump safe here. They're trying to fly as flat as they can over the top to save every second possible, whilst they're literally pushing people in the air, getting a bit of a knock as they're taking off, so they're having to adjust on the fly. So it's pretty organized chaos. Yeah. But when things go wrong, it can be pretty scary.
I've seen some people do it and they connect their knee. Yeah. Like in a normal hurdle, your knee hits a thing, the hurdle will fall down. You can still regain your balance. But I've seen people jump that and their knee has just cracked it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if
And
you saw the Olympic final. Lemaitre, who's the world record holder in the event, his trail leg caught the barrier and it just slung his head straight into the ground. He just went
yeah,
full goal. And like, luckily, they said he was fine, kind of thing afterwards. But it just shows that these athletes aren't thinking, take the conservative approach. They're trying to take every single risk they can to win the race.
yeah. And I suppose in training too, you've got a certain distance when you've got a leap to go over it. And I can totally get when the adrenaline's up and the race is getting faster and all of a sudden the pace you're doing, trying to line that up perfectly must be absolutely nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think it should be. And when you describe it to someone, I think you definitely double take and think like, oh, bloody hell, what I'm doing is, pretty on edge and there's a lot of risks involved. But when you're in the heat of the moment, like you said, the adrenaline just takes over. So
Yeah.
I think if you're thinking defensively, you're not going to be a good steeplechaser. So you need to be thinking like, every single barrier is an opportunity. I can make up a quarter of a second, quarter of a second, quarter of a second. I can jump a bit lower. I can wedge myself through that gap. You got to think aggressively. Like I think as soon as you lose that aggressive mindset, you're just going to start to shuffle back. And then, like, for example, if you lose like 0.2 of a second over every barrier, that's 1 second a lap. That's 7 seconds you got to make up later in the race. So you got to be super on and just going for it, and you can't be scared.
Yeah, and lower speed. So the lower you can keep over the hurdle itself or the steeple, the more you're going to maintain your actual speed.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where like technical work comes in a lot more. Is I don't think too many people think, oh, I got to jump low, I got to jump low. You might do that if you're doing like specific technical practice, but in a race, it's just autopilot. Like, you just think, basically lean forward and accelerate and jump. If you're thinking about anything else, you're going to have mental overload. I've seen athletes do that. Like, when we had a really small, basically like lead-in meet one season, and I remember my training partner just had an absolute brain fade and just ran into the barrier, didn't even jump. And I remember chatting after the race, and I was like, what happened? I just heard this bang behind me, and then all of a sudden I'm running solo. He goes, and this guy, he's national champion, like phenomenal athlete, like Australian rep at World Uni Games. And he just said, mate, my brain just stopped working going into one of the barriers. I must have just thought too much and just didn't jump, just ran into it.
Okay. And you've also got too, when you go over the jump where the water is, it's actually, what's the degree that the track goes into the water? Because you've then got to land there as well.
Yeah.
And I've seen people land there and be tripped up just because of that angle where the heel drops.
Yeah, and like I think Tokyo Olympics, if you see like Jen Lacaze's final, actually that's that kind of landing on an angle. That's how she ruptured her Achilles. I don't know the exact angle of it, to be honest.
Is it the same on all tracks? All tracks is exact.
I'm sure the angle of it, I reckon, is pretty standardized. Like, I haven't felt like there's a different angle too much in all of them. One thing that's not standardized though is track length or track curvature. So you can rock up to different tracks and they all have different length laps. And so you actually have a different start point on every lap, on every track.
Oh, okay.
And that's not necessarily standardized for outside jump, inside jump. Like, for inside jump, they can put it basically anywhere inside the curve. Outside as well, they can adjust the angle of the curve so it's different. Like, I've had races where I've basically nearly had 2 jumps on the curve just because of the way it's shaped. It just ends up that way. So it's it's probably like the one event in athletics that isn't very standardized, which is odd when you think about athletics being a real black and white sport.
But so there actually is there's a home advantage. If you are running on a track that you were training on and somebody was only running on that track just for that event, there is a slight home advantage.
Yeah, potentially. I think you get other advantages of a home advantage too. Like, it's just like comfortable warming up in your home environment and all that. Like, to be fair, I've run all my best times overseas. My PB's from Spain. I'd never been to that track until the afternoon of the race. LA was my next best time. Oh, sorry, no. Queensland was my next best time for 2 races. And I'd done one steeplechase there before, and the other one, I'd done one steeplechase in both those tracks before. And LA, like, I went and visually saw the track the day before, and then that was it. Yeah. So I guess all my fastest times aren't in Adelaide, but they're probably, maybe I could run quick in Adelaide. I've never really given it a proper shot, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose it would also depend the competition you're against and what the event is as well.
Yeah, there's so many variables. And I think that's what makes running a super quick time so tough, is that like getting fit's almost the easy part. Like I feel like once you've been doing it for a while and you've been working well with a team and a coach that kind of understands how your physiology behaves, and you kind of work that out pretty well yourself too.
Yeah.
Getting fit's the easy part. And then there's the controllables in a race, like there's race positioning, there's how you like mentally go into the race, how you, as we touched over, how you approach the jumps. But then there's uncontrollables. Like does someone take it on? Is there a good pacemaker? Are the conditions good? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is it windy? Are you going to get knocked too much by too many athletes? Like sometimes you're in races where they just put 25 athletes in the field and it's genuinely chaos for the first couple of laps until it spreads out. So
some of the races could be quite aggressive. Those first couple of laps while everyone's barging each other out of the way.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you can't get too disheartened by that. Otherwise, you're just going to get shuffled to the back. It's like a cycling crit race, right? If you keep getting, if you're too scared to hold your spot, you just keep getting shuffled back. And so you almost got to be the one that is the aggressor a little bit and pushes your way forward a little bit and takes the risks here or there and isn't scared to potentially get a knock or fall or anything.
There's a lot more to it, isn't it? When you think of that, all the things that can go on, and then you compare that to just a bunch of fast guys that do the 100 meters. All you can do is run in a straight line.
Yeah, it's a completely different sport.
Yeah, but their room for error is they make one little mistake. It's the race is over. They may as well just jog off to the side. You could have a lot of things go on and go wrong, but then all of a sudden you might get a break at something. You've still got minutes to actually try and rectify something if it goes wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting contrast, is that for a sprinter, they probably can execute pretty close to perfection. And I think given their fitness on the day, they probably do a few races where they probably hit 99.5% every so often. We never hit perfection. Because I don't think I've ever had a race where I've nailed every single barrier. I've never had a race where I've hit, so there's 35 jumps. I've never hit more than 35 jumps in a day that is perfect conditions with perfect pace without getting a knock. Like it just doesn't exist. And that's part of the sport. So I think perfection in our event isn't executing every single step like a sprinter does. It's more, how do you react to the imperfections and how much does it throw you?
It's almost like a poker game, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I've heard people talk about playing cards like blackjack, and they said they can have everything in their head working fine, but then depends who else is at the table and what they do affects what ends up happening with them. Yeah, if a person decides to draw a card or not draw a card, they will either get the next one or not get it. So they've always got to make those adjustments on the run. So it sounds like you're doing exactly the same thing in a race.
Wow. It's why it's such a tough event.
To think about.
Yeah, it's why it's such a tough event, because it requires a fairly high level of, and like you're not consciously doing it, but when you go back and reflect, you realize you do it. But it requires a high level of just staying very mentally switched on throughout the race and decision making. And I think that's why you see like a lot of top athletes, at least in Australia, when they try the steeplechase, and they think, oh, well, I can smash this guy in the flat. Let's just go to steeplechase. The differential shouldn't be too bad. Sometimes they convert outside of a minute, like for a 3K. Yeah. They'll run in the 740s and they don't even run in the 840s for a 3K, for a 3K steeple kind of thing. And it's just a different mindset of racing. And there's so many different variables that you're not used to in a flat race.
Okay. Do you ever go back? Well, I assume you do. When the race is finished, you go back and watch the race, and do you look at things and you see things, you go, oh, I didn't see that. Or you did something, you didn't even notice that you were doing something that you could have changed and learned from it the next time?
Yeah, I probably don't go back and actually watch every single race. I'm pretty good at recalling, I think, the important moments. And when I'm not, I've got my coach who watches like every single race. And so fortunately in this day and age, every race is recorded and live streamed. So my coach is, if he can't be there, he's at least watching the live stream.
Yeah.
And I think between us, we can usually recall everything that's significant. I think early days, I probably watched it a bit more. And that was just to focus a bit more on, okay, what technically, how was I over the hurdles? Whereas I'm at the point now, I've been doing it for 6 years,
Yeah.
and you just self-diagnose if you're not quite jumping right. I'm not smooth, I'm jumping too high, my lead leg's too bent every single time, and you know exactly what you need to work on. So I don't really need to go back and remind myself of that.
But like you said before, if you're doing that during a race, if you're thinking about that during the race, you're not concentrating on what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, if that's going through your mind during the race, you're probably having a bad race. That's happened with me before. Yeah, I've definitely thought like I'm jumping bad, and it was on the way to a bad race. So
yeah, but have you had any races when you've started and the first lap and you've just gone, this is just not my day. You just know it's not, or you've just gone, nah, okay, you just keep pushing, and you just, no matter how it's going, you just go, I'm just going to finish this thing the best I can.
Yeah, I probably more take the mindset of keep pushing, and you try and resolve the issues. So plenty of races, mind you, I've had a bit of an uncomfortable start and I've been able to rectify it. And so you got to stay optimistic and try and fix it. But sometimes you do everything you can and you're having a bad day. And that's sport. It's unpredictable. If you're rocked up every time and you executed perfectly and there was no guesswork involved and there was a plan between all the races, then sport wouldn't be sport anymore.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
That's just, you got to roll with it a little bit.
Okay, a couple more running questions. I want to ask you about podiatry again.
Yeah.
What was it like being at your first Olympics, getting picked in that Olympic team?
Yeah, getting picked in it, I think, was the real special part because, like a bit of backstory to it. I initially wasn't in a selection position. So I actually finished out initially one spot.
Okay.
They took 45 to Tokyo and I finished 46 on the rankings. And it wasn't until a British athlete wasn't selected that there's the chance that I could get selected. But it required Britain had to officially withdraw him in the amount of time to let me get in. And just from, phone call timing and all that, I didn't really find out until right before it. And so I was feeling a bit deflated and feeling like it wasn't going to happen at that point. So when I actually got told I was in, it was like, I've seen my dream sail away to all of a sudden the ships turned around, come back and said, "Oi, we forgot you, jump on." And so that was pretty awesome. But then actually being at the Olympics, I think going through that real whirlwind experience probably hindered me a lot. I was quite overwhelmed at it. It was very much a kid in a candy store type set. Or another analogy I use, I feel like I was a dog chasing a truck, but then I caught the truck. I didn't really know what to do with it. I caught it. And so I look back at my race from that and I was just making so many just silly decisions. I was running wide, jumping poorly, not taking a good line. I was really tense and I didn't really know what I was doing. I'd done so many races at that point, just solo, and they were so measured that I wasn't used to actually racing. And I definitely let the enormity of the event overwhelm me. But nonetheless.
Was it the quality when you get to the Olympic Games, that quality, everybody on the track is the best in their country.
Everyone's good.
It's not that there's no slackers. You're not going to go, but hopefully I've got some lazy guy that hasn't been training. Everybody there is at the top.
Yeah.
So then when you're really up against the best, you really see that skill level just elevate.
Yeah. The absolute top of the world. They can just make so many, I'd call them mistakes. They'd call it playing safe and just still cruise through. I remember I had the Olympic champion in my heat in Tokyo, and at the time, I think he had the world lead. It was before the world record had been broken by Germa, and this is Soufiane Abakali, the Moroccan athlete in the end. And I just remember him running basically the whole heat in lane 3 with a full person gap between him and the next athlete because he just knew that the only way that he wasn't getting through is if he got tripped and injured. And so
he kept everyone's way.
Yeah, and so he literally just stayed away from the pack. He just didn't want anyone to touch him, kind of thing. And just being able to do it that easily was definitely a new experience that I hadn't raced, at least in steeplechase. I'd gone into at that point a lot of just time trial type races to try and hit the qualifier. I was only 0.1 off the qualifier that year, so we were really trying to just hit it. Whereas now I think I've had a bit more experience in races that I feel if I was fit and conditioned like I was there, I'd probably be a bit more relaxed and hold my own.
Okay, what about when you went to the second Olympics in Paris?
Yeah.
Were you a bit more relaxed?
Yeah, I was a lot more relaxed. I was really frustrated though. I got the flu like right before it, and I've never been so sick in my life. So that was just bad. Like literally, I think it was 2 days before I was meant to fly out. I remember calling my coach, just being like, "Oh, I think I'm feeling a bit under the weather, so I might skip my double." And I don't know if you've ever had the flu before, but it comes on like really quickly. That's what separates it from like a cold or COVID. And then I remember calling it back like half an hour later, and I was like, "No, mate, actually, I think I'm really sick." And he goes, "What? You suddenly changed your tune like that?" I was like, "Yeah, I've never had something like this before." And then I just remember I had a whole week of just coughing up my lungs, so much coughing up blood that I've never had before. And I just remember I had to delay my flight because I couldn't fly. I was that unwell. And then when I got over there, I did my best to, try and get myself back into shape. But I was really fighting a bit of an uphill battle. And I think the conditioning was there. When we're doing training sessions, I was in phenomenal form, and we could tell that in shorter reps. But then as soon as we did anything aerobic, my lungs just stopped working, kind of thing. So yeah. Paris was a pretty frustrating experience on that, because I feel we'd had a really good season. We'd done everything right. We've left no stone unturned. I think we'd finally worked out a good travel schedule for me. I'd hit all the overseas races really well, and I'd then take my training to another level going in, to then not be able to execute when I feel I was pretty close to my probably like peak career physiology and performance. Was really frustrating.
Yeah, I suppose it's just one of the things, isn't it? It's all timing, luck.
Yeah.
It's just one of those. I remember I was at Steve Bradbury is our first gold medal winner at the Olympics. Yeah. So I bumped into him a few times, and we were both speaking at this event once. But then I remember him telling the story when he said that, like, at a couple of the Olympic Games before that, the Winter Olympics, he was the best short course ice skater in the world. But every time he went to the Olympics or any major world championship, he kept getting taken out in the heats and just never finished. So when he went to that last one, and his coach said to him, "You're not as fast as these guys anymore. So let's come up with a different game plan and just stay behind and hope they all knock each other out." But he just said all he wanted was just to go to an Olympic Games and just skate a good race.
Yeah.
Yeah, the best that he could do at what he was right there and then. And just so happened that everybody fell over in the heats, the semis, whatever it was, and the final, and he won it. So
yeah, well, I remember chatting to Jonah Oliver, he was the psychologist on the team for Athletics Australia. And he's a phenomenal sports psychologist. He's worked with Cam Smith, some of the Formula One guys.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he says athletes need to focus on at the top level is not going to some unicorn kind of run. He goes, you can only do what you're physically capable of. But he goes, where it's performance enhancing is if you can execute a race that you know you can do. There's going to be heaps of people in the race that don't do that. And so that's where you get a jump on some of your competition, is if you go to as close as possible to your perfect race, not everyone's going to do that. And that's where you make the jumps. Whereas if you reach too high and you try and do something that you're not capable of, then that's where it bites in the ass.
Yeah, and it'd be the same as you. If you were going to race and you went out much harder than you'd ever trained to do, you probably by halftime through the race, you'd be at the back of the pack.
Yeah. And steeplechase when you blow up hard.
Yeah.
you need that like peak power output to get over the barriers. So it's not like a 5K or a 50 or like any flat race really, that you do have a mild pace drop if you blow up. Like this one, you physically lose all efficiency over the barrier. And as I said, if you lose 0.2 over each barrier, it's a whole second a lap plus your blow up. So, and you're losing more than 0.2 when you blow up. You're losing like half a second. So that's 3.5 seconds a lap just in the jumps. And then you lose pace in running as well.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to podiatry for a sec.
Yeah.
You did podiatry, you finished podiatry, you've gotten all the way through. So I take sports podiatry is just the inevitable area that you were interested in. How have you found with your training, and you still compete now, you've learnt through sport, what you've learnt through competition? How's that evolved you into the podiatrist you are today?
Oh, yeah, it's factored it in heaps, because one thing that's huge and that you don't, at least for me, I didn't really fully appreciate at uni, was that whole concept of patient-centered care and like having patients drive their own treatment program, and you're more there as an advisor. I really got a good look at that through sport. So, for example, sports people are on a timeline, And they get injuries, of course, because they're pushing the limits all the time. And sometimes where you're being told this kind of black and white narrative of this kind of injury takes 6 weeks or this kind of injury takes 4 weeks, but I'm competing in 3. So then they're just find a solution.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. And so that's where I really love sports podiatry and really made me open my eyes to that whole patient-centered care thing, is that you need to then shift it towards, well, you've got to offer a different option than just this black and white 6 weeks versus like, how are we going to do this? And that's when you've got to chat to them. Okay, look, it's not ideal, but we can try this. These are some of the risks, but, you know, we can potentially manage your symptoms so that you can go compete as safely as possible. And then where it gets even more difficult, but then again, like more like enjoyable, because I like that creativity, is you can't scare them off either. So you're balancing that whole psychological element of healthcare as well, in terms of like letting the athlete go perform at the highest level possible and not scare them off with psychology, but then at the same time too, providing good healthcare where you're educating them on the potential risks so that they understand the process and can make that decision themselves and be confident in that decision themselves.
I like that approach. I used to say that my patients, I'd give them all the information and then I'd say to them, now, bottom line is you're an adult.
Yeah.
You really get to choose whether if you want to go and do that race or you skip this race so you can do the next one even better and injury-free, or you can do this one not at your best, make it injure worse, and that'll affect the next race. So I go, you're an adult. And 50% of the time they would skip it, 50% of the time they would do it, but at least they were making the decision, but with the information, they had the right information.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I think that's where I really enjoy working in sports versus like, I mean, you know, it's like everyone at university, they probably start working a bit more in chronic disease and diabetes. And like a lot of those treatment like modalities, I guess, like maybe unless someone has a holiday coming up kind of thing, they're not on a massive time scale. And so it's very much a discussion of this is the gold standard and then this is next best and then this is next best. It's not really this is better than that in this case if you do this sort of thing. So I think that's the really cool thing about working in sports is it's creative and you see different things every day, and no two injuries are the same because no two people are the same. And that's what's really exciting about it.
So with your background, going to the Olympics at the level you've trained at, your patients would appreciate that too, that when you're talking to them, because I remember having, remember this one female patient that came in, telling me about all this stuff she was going to do, and she was going to the next Olympic Games, and I'm sitting there, like, oh yeah, I'm going, what have you done locally that's impressive? Oh, well, no, I haven't actually won anything locally yet, but I'm going to do this. And I'm like, oh, okay. So next thing she brings a coach and you don't realize she's going to be at their next Olympics. And I'm like, and how many Olympic athletes have you trained again? I lost count. And, oh, well, no, she's going to be my first one.
Yeah.
But I think knowing that you have, and I've never been to Olympics myself, so not talking from any experience, but you that have been at that level, talking to an athlete who wants to, could be a completely different sport, but really wants to get to the top, I think your background would just be so valuable. Yeah,
I think it helps you buy in. And it's funny, initially though, it probably goes two ways. Like I think I get some patients, I get 3 kinds of patients. One of them is they don't actually know me. They've just been referred to see me. And so they just think I'm any other podiatrist and they're not into it.
Which is fair enough.
Yeah, which is fair enough. And then the other ones come in, they know me, and that's why they've come and seen me because of like my history in running. And so they're like, okay, well, he knows so much about running, and so I run, and so like he's the guy. And then the third one is they come in, they see me, but then they think my running is so different to what their running is. And I think that one's a really good, interesting conversation where I get to break that down a bit more. And at the end of the day, like if you're coming in and seeing me, and I guess the patient load that I've just developed, probably more so just through word of mouth and my personality, are patients that coming in and whatever level they want to get to, whether it's getting over their injury or whether it's preparing for the next race, they want to target their own high performance. And so they want to have the best level healthcare. They want to get ready and perform well at whatever, whether it's park run on the weekend or whether it's Gold Coast Marathon or whether it's, I even see people for getting ready for marathons overseas, like London Marathon, and all the way to sometimes representing Australia as well. So like sometimes I'll see athletes coming in preparation for, sometimes for the Olympics, and I'm on the team with them, which is a funny dynamic. And I think that's the cool conversation I say is like, whatever it is you want to do, sure, like the load and the numbers are all going to be different, but the psychological approach is the same. You're here because you want high performance and you want the best and you want the gold standard, and you're driven to work towards that. So it doesn't matter if you're getting ready for the Olympics. It doesn't matter if you're getting ready for a new park run, people. It's all the same mindset and it's all the same fundamentals at the same day.
Yeah, and that's the way I would look at it too, that I've never been a runner, but the sports that I played, if I was going to someone who had been to Olympic Games or played at a certain level in any sport, I would really be drawing on their experience of performance more so than the specific sport itself.
Yeah. And in fact, like I see a lot of patients who play sports, for example, that like aren't even endurance. Like I see a lot of cricket players, fast bowlers, for example, they get their big toenails smashed just because their action, they plant their foot in the ground so hard, their foot rolls forward and they get heaps of ingrown toenails. And so like I see lots of like things like that aren't even like endurance related injuries. And I think it's the competitiveness
though. I think every sports person, whether you're an elite level or like a park runner, if you're a competitive person, I think you appreciate the competitiveness of other athletes and what they've done in the past. So I think you can draw on that as well. Yeah.
It's that drive to succeed. And I think it's, whatever you're doing. And you get a lot of people that they're not really even into sports. And I still see some non-sports people, but they just have this drive to succeed. Like they just want to be well kind of thing. You know, they don't like being in pain and they're driven to work hard to get themselves out of pain. And
that makes
sense. That's a fine mindset for me. I think that's where I thrive with those kinds of patients.
So have you got your own clinic at the moment or you're working for somebody else?
So I work with, and actually that's like a good segue into how I balance my kind of running and all that. Yeah. So I work with Michael Nishki at the Sports and Arthritis Clinic.
Okay.
And so Michael's really good to me. And I think I wouldn't have got to where I am today, both in a podiatry career path and both my own running career path, if it wasn't having someone who employed me who gets running. So like he runs himself, he coaches himself as well. He coaches national level athletes.
That's good.
And so he fully gets the demands. And when I asked for, like 1 year, for example, world champs, I had to take 3.5 months off. And he's fortunate enough to trust that I'll come back and I'll still gain that knowledge that I pick up from my sport, bring that into the clinic and develop something that I think no other podiatrist has ever had in South Australia yet. And he supports me on that. It's a massive burden to him at times. He has to work a lot more hours. He's got a young family. And so I understand that not everyone's going to be that generous.
Tell him to harden up. Just go harden up. Yeah.
I'd never do that. I'm so thankful for the opportunities he gave me. But also as well too, he's a phenomenal podiatrist himself. And I think he's kind of the guy that, at least in South Australia, is the running podiatrist sort of thing. And I think kind of like seeing what he's done, I'm like, that's great. That's what I wanted to be, like through uni kind of thing. And so it's as well as like achieving my dream in running and having him support that too. Like I look up to him so much as as a mentor as well, and his pathway and how he's developed. And I learned so much from him in podiatry too. And he's big on that subjective experience so that you can relate to the patient and have their buy-in and develop a treatment program that they are going to succeed with is a massive part of, I think, what he's taught me as well.
So how did you find him? Did you hunt him down for a job, approach him, or did he advertise that there was a job going and you just applied for it? How did you end up connecting?
I think it was like a bit of both. So when I moved over initially, I was through COVID, to be fair. So I don't think anyone was hiring at that point. I think everything was closed. But then when things started opening up, I got to know him just through the local racing circuit. And then he mentioned that like he was a podiatrist, said, I know who you are kind of thing. And I said, I might be looking to hire someone if you're interested. And so as soon as he mentioned that to me, I chased that pretty hard and kept pestering him, being like, if you're still looking. And then so eventually we caught up for coffee, had a chat about what it would look like. I was working, I'd call it semi-regionally, but other people would call it rurally, for another podiatry clinic, just doing general care work out in Hamley Bridge, which is like 50 minutes out of Adelaide at the time as well. And that complemented, I guess, the workload at the time when I started with him. So I started small and just like built up the hours as my patient load built up. And then I guess, yeah, just the rest is history from there. I think because it's mostly, from then anyway, it's mostly just been me and him working there. So I think the cool thing is like we're like a pretty small team. So it's a very like personal relationship type setup kind of thing. If either of us need a hand with something in the short term, we just reach out to the other. It's not too strict on you have to work this many hours and this many KPIs, these kind of numbers sort of thing. It's just as long as you're generally growing, developing and working hard and helping out where you can, everyone's happy, which is good. I like the flexibility.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect position though. The best jobs is finding something where you match with the person that you're going to be working with.
100%.
And especially if you have a common interest or the clinic is doing the type of work that you really like as well. I think if you just take a job somewhere because it's a job, or if you just employ a podiatrist just because they've got a hat on that says podiatrist, that's why there's so many people only stay at a job for 12 months and leave again, because they just haven't found the right fit. So it sounds like you have. Just got one last question. We spoke about this before I pressed record, was you said you're probably not going to go to another Olympic Games, but your goal is to break the 3,000 meter steeplechase record in Australia. That's your plan before you retire.
Yeah, it's an ambitious plan, but I've always had big goals. And I think at this stage in my career and my age, so I'm 30 this year, so that doesn't sound old for heaps of people. I think with where I am at my stage in life, I'm not sure if I could put the pressure on my wife to support me for another 3 or 4 years of running as well. And that'd be unfair, I think, to the clinic too. And so I want to chase that Oz record. How long that'll take, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the next logical goal for me. So I feel like I've achieved a lot so far. I've won 2 national titles. I've been to 2 Olympics. I've been to a world champs. And so the next logical thing, I've got a state record. I think the next logical thing is to chase the Oz record. And I think if I ticked that off, went to world champs, I think had a race that I was super proud with, or at least the journey I was super proud with, and did the same thing, left no stone unturned, then I think I can't have any regrets in that whole journey if I already don't have them already.
Yeah. So Sean Crichton, who's the current record holder of the 3,000, he put him on notice that he's going to be.
He wants his record to go. I think
he would.
Sean's so awesome. I don't know if you know Sean or not, but he is a phenomenal person. And I think one thing that he's really good at, he gives back to the sport so much. He sits on the board of selectors, for example, like for Australian teams. And I think because his record is so old, I think pretty ready to do the cool thing about having a record and passing it on to the next person. And I don't know if that'll be like necessarily me. I'll do my best to try and make it me. But like Ben Buckingham, he's running 8:19. Ed Tribbers, he's run 8:19. We've got guys like Mick Stanofsek, he ran 8:29 in his first season doing it. So, and he's run a 3:54 mile. So who knows, he might come out of the woodwork and run really fast. But I think Sean's takes that really nice, non-egotistical approach where I think he looks at his record, and as much as he sees it as such an amazing personal achievement, I think he also wants to be able to pass that record on to someone else.
Well, that shows you though, that someone like him, one, he's giving back to the sport, but to see that record broken would let him know too that a sport that he loved has progressed. And I think it's the same in podiatry. You can achieve a certain amount in podiatry, but I look back now and I see what younger podiatrists like yourself are doing. Going back 30-something years ago when I graduated, it was just sort of not really heard of. So, but when I see all the younger podiatrists coming through and how they have interests in certain areas, and they're really taking the profession to that next level and beyond what we could have even imagined back in 88 when I graduated, it's fantastic to see.
Yeah, and I think it's good. It's a good mindset to take to be excited by that stuff. I remember a great quote from Michael that he said to me, because he coaches as well, is he goes, I think one of the things you want to do as a coach is you want to coach people that are better than you. Yeah. And I think having that mindset of being like, oh yeah, cool, I'm developing something better than even I was developed, I think that should excite people, as opposed to and in contrast to that, as opposed to people having that big ego on them, being like, oh, no one will be as good as me, sort of thing. Yeah. I think that's where anything in life you're doing, whether it's sport, whether it's podiatry, I think that really stifles progression. a little bit. So I think getting excited about developing and breaking your records. I've got a few young juniors that I work with at the moment in the group I coach, and I'm trying to get a few of them into steeplechase. And I just think it'd be like one of the coolest things if I coach in the future someone who broke my state record, to be like, how cool is that? I got to handball my state record onto someone that I've coached.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do think the podiatry profession, going back a couple of decades ago, and there's probably still a few in the profession that were trying to keep it where it was, didn't want to see it overly progress because they were not then being seen as the top dogs in the profession. But I think as they're slowly disappearing, I think the younger podiatrists are actually, they're all encouraging each other as they're going through. And I look at some of my coaching clients, and some of them they're still just in their 30s. And I look at what their businesses are like now and what they're going to be doing by the time they're my age. And I'm in awe of where they're going to end up going. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And I think that's a good reason too why people, I think, get into healthcare. Like I remember when I was at uni, I was chatting I caught up for coffee with a podiatrist, Jason Augusta.
Yeah.
I'm originally from Melbourne, and he's in Melbourne. And he was a really good runner back in the day. Like he made World Junior Cross team for Australia. And he's now like one of the best sports pods in Australia and certainly in Melbourne. And one of the questions he asked me, he goes like, why'd you get into podiatry? And I said, I want to help people. I want to try and develop a network where people have these ailments. They can come see me and then they're fixed afterwards. Like it's simple as that. And one of the things he goes, that's really good. He goes, that's one of the reasons probably why you'll have sustainability in the industry and you'll hang around. So I think taking that approach where you can see people coming through, again, like even like I'm only 30 and I see people who are at uni that I run with, they're studying podiatry, and like their knowledge of where I was at their age is so far ahead. And like that excites me because I think like I guess doing at least doing my best to do a lot to develop my own skills, knowledge, interpersonal relationship skills. And then these guys are already ahead of where I was. It's pretty exciting, I think. And it's good for me to encourage them to keep going to see where they can get to. And that's just going to help more people.
Yeah, well, hopefully if I'm still doing the podcast in 10 years' time, I'll get you back on here again. Or maybe not in 10 years.
My whole views on everything would probably be different by that point.
Yeah.
You know, even 5 years ago, like how I viewed podiatry and sport is so different to how I view it now.
Well, that's why I look at it. Maybe in 5 years' time, get you back on. Go, what did you end up doing? Did you break the record? Have you brought somebody through who broke your state record? It's I just think the progression of everything is great. So, Matthew, I want to thank you for coming on the Podiatry Legends podcast. I had to give you a little nudge. I had to give you a reminder because I spoke to you last year and you totally forgot about it.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm terrible with social media and I get messages get lost all the time. So that's on me. But it's been an absolute pleasure being on. So thank you.
This has been a lot of fun. I've learned more about the steeplechase and just the psychology behind it all. And I reckon anyone who's listened to this episode all the way through would be exactly the same. I reckon they would have gone, well, I'm going to pay more attention to the steeplechase now when it's on TV. So thank you very much.
Good. No, my pleasure.